So there is no bliss. There's no such thing as bliss. That which we refer to as a bliss is just a kind of pleasure. It's not a pleasure of the flesh. It's not carnal, but it's still sensorial. It's still something that you experience with your senses. There are no abstract kinds of bliss, or pleasure. Or if there is an abstract bliss, then it wouldn't really make a difference, because in Buddhism we regard abstraction as just as a sixth sense. There's nothing special about it, like that which you find in certain kinds of arts and literature. It could give you an incredible levels of pleasure or bliss or joy. It's still a conditioned experience, and it's still something that functions in exactly the same way as the senses function. Something that you experience. Period. Now, the only bliss there is that we could speak about in a Buddhist context, I believe, is that of Nirodha. It is not a kind of experience. It is an experience, but it's not something that you consume as an experience. Rather, it's the gradual diminishing of that which you already experience. Various kinds of feelings, thoughts, abstractions, emotions, responses, impulses. The gradual diminishing of that which you can experience in your through your practice. That is what constitutes bliss in Buddhist practice. It's not something new. It's not a positive form of experience. It's just the gradual absence of experience, the diminishing, the vanishing of experience, which is exactly the same as Bhava Nirodha, and finally Vijnana Nirodha, the cessation of the conditioned consciousness itself, the consciousness that needs, that seeks, that requires to experience something in a positive sense. That is what constitutes bliss in Buddhist practice. All the meditative pleasures and bliss, all other forms of mental calm, peace, serenity, all that is great, and it supports the consciousness in its quest towards liberation. But that couldn't possibly be regarded as the goal, or something that is of the nature of deliverance. In fact, there is every reason to think of these things as experiences that belong to the ego. You see, when you abide in sunlight and it's wonderful scenery and there is a wonderful breeze, everything seems so wonderfully peaceful and calm, and it's just a remarkable experience of joy and serenity. What is it in that very picture that I just drew? What is it that is enjoying this? It's the ego. There is nothing that is inherently or substantially blissful in that situation. It's the ego that is relishing in this peace. The ego is not just, or not necessarily something that is destructive and hurtful and violent. It's also something that could be an artist, could be a sensitive person, could be something that seeks what's beautiful and what's calm and what's serene. The point is that so long there is this relishing in pleasure, whatever that pleasure may be, whatever form it may take, so long it is something that is experienced, then it is the ego that is indulging in it. It's not a gross manifestation of the ego, but it's still the ego. And the deva that abides in constant such situation of bliss a refined form of bliss. It's refined even more than all the arts that we have in our human world. That Deva possesses an ego, and that's why it vanishes, it dies, it's still subject to the conditions of birth and death. It's because its consciousness it's still conditioned, and it's still blind to a certain extent. And of course, the idea is that the Deva is unable to even envisage or imagine or transcend that ego, because it's constantly blissful. You see, in a certain sense, there is danger in this association with or identification with blissful states, because they might actually conduce the consciousness to abide in it permanently. And that is something that goes against our quest and goes against the task of self-awareness and the transcendence of the conditioned functions of the consciousness. You identify with your consciousness despite of the fact that it's still conditioned. It's conditioned through blissful experiences, but it's still conditioned. It's still dependent. And it's still blind because it now identifies itself with an experience that is temporal. But again, it's not something that is gross or it's a refined form of pleasure and bliss, but it's still a conditioned experience. And so we must guard against this relishing in blissful experiences, or identifying with them, or relying too much on them, or seeking them too much. It's rather the opposite, actually. The moment that we find ourselves becoming too comfortable, too okay, too happy with ourselves and with our state of mind, the moment we should start asking questions about whether we're doing something wrong, or whether we're becoming too much identified with these positive, blissful states.